Hello, everyone. My name is Ziwang, and I'm the moderator for this webinar. Good morning, my fellow students, research staff, and professors, and also good evening, Professor Vidya Madhavan. Very
Hello.
welcome to today's webinar named Anecdotes and Science, Musings on My Career Path, provided by Professor Madhavan. She is from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Quantum Materials and Imaging Lab, and she is currently working on condensed matter physics. And today she would like to trace her path as a scientist, both in terms of personal decisions and the forces that determine her scientific path. During the webinar, if you have any questions, instead of putting your questions in the chat box, please put your question in the Q&A box. Thank you for your cooperation. And now let's welcome Professor Madhavan.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall I just start?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if there are questions during the talk, will you stop me in the middle? Is that how it works? Or will you wait till the end?
No, Prof,
So
we
there
can
will
take,
be
we can take the Q&A at the end. They can post their questions in the Q&A box, and and we can have a discussion at the end of the
session. That's fine, as long as I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay,
sure,
let me just move this out of the way. Okay, very good. So my name is Vidya Madhavan. I'm at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm an experimentalist. I do scanning tunneling microscopy, and it's actually a real pleasure to be here. I, of course, wish I could be there in person, but even this is great. I'd love to talk to you after the talk. So let me just start. Yeah, let me just start by just saying this. Some people, they know in high school, they want to do physics. That's what they want to do. They want to pursue it. I did not realize for a couple of reasons. So I grew up in India, and I actually loved math and physics when I was in high school, but I never imagined that I would actually do physics. And one of the biggest reasons is that I had no role models. I had not seen anyone who was a physicist closely. I did not realize that one could actually have a career in physics. And so in India, if you're interested in math and science, what typically happens is your parents tell you to go to engineering school. And that's what I did. I applied to go to engineering school. And I ended up in this place called Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, which is in the south of India. Actually, let me show you in the map. It's somewhere here. And that's where I did my undergraduate. So just an interesting thing, the time that I was doing undergrad, they used to, every year, they would take in 400 students as a batch. And out of those 400 students in my year, there were only 6 girls. And that posed many challenges, but I'm not going to actually get into that. So I did do my engineering, but towards the end, I realized that, it came time to make a decision about the next step. And at that time, I realized that the courses that I had found most interesting were actually courses where we had been addressing fundamental questions like, strain mechanics or something like that, where we had asked and answered fundamental questions. And I realized that I was more interested in fundamental science than in actual applications. So then after thinking a bit, I realized that I really wanted to do physics because that had been my love in high school. So I did a quick master's and then applied to graduate school, and then made a decision to go to Boston University to do my PhD. And so I was there from 1993 to 1999. And there are 3 words that basically sum up my experience at Boston College. And that is, it was painful, right? And this is true for, I think, every graduate student at some time of their graduate career. Life is a bit painful, but also it was a huge amount of fun. Okay. So I'll tell you why it was painful and why it was fun. Let me just tell you why it was painful. I mean, different students experience this pain of graduate school at different times in their career. For me, it was in the first couple of years mainly because as I just told you, I'd studied engineering as an undergrad, and my knowledge of fundamental physics was not very good. And so I went from knowing very little physics to being thrust into graduate school, which meant I had to study graduate level quantum mechanics, graduate level statistical mechanics, graduate level E&M with no background whatsoever. And of course, in Boston University, as is the case with most schools here, you have to pass something called qualifying exams, which are actually written exams in these subject matters. And so this aspect of graduate school was pretty painful because, I had to really work extremely hard to catch up. But the fun started when I chose my advisor. And just by luck, 1 year after I joined Boston University, Mike Cromie joined BU as a young assistant professor. And Mike came from IBM. And many of you have seen these images. These are images of scanning tunneling microscopy images. The dots that you see here are single atoms. Actually, let me see if I can find a better. Okay, I cannot. I don't know how to make my arrow into something nice. Oops. How do you go? See, this is how you mess up. Okay. Never mind. Okay, so you see my arrow, right? Do you see my cursor? Okay, so these dots are single atoms. And what Mike did with the help of his colleagues was they deposited these single atoms on surfaces, and then they moved them one by one to build these beautiful structures that they called quantum corals. And what you see here in this final image is not just the atoms that they've moved into this perfect circle, but also these waves inside. And these waves are actually quantum mechanical electron waves that you see inside this quantum coral. And the reason Mike was doing this was he was actually trying to build a stadium structure. And theory predicted that a stadium creates quantum chaos. So the quantum mechanical wave functions of electrons inside the stadium will experience chaotic behavior, and that's what he wanted to study with the STM. But unfortunately for him, these structures that he built, these corals, are leaky. So the electron wave functions don't just live inside, they also leak outside the box. And for that reason, he couldn't quite see quantum chaos. But these images became extremely famous, and they're iconic images. And so when Mike came to Boston University fresh from IBM, from having made these quantum corals, and within a couple of months after joining BU, he gave this talk showing all this beautiful data, and I was immediately hooked. I knew that this is what I wanted to do for a PhD. So this was the team. This is me right here. When I joined the lab, there was nothing. He was a young assistant professor. There was nothing. There was a hole in the ground, and that's it. There was nothing else. So we had to build everything from scratch. So when before me, there was another student who had joined, Wei Chen, and it was just Mike, Wei Chen, and me for the first couple of years. And so together we built this instrument. Mike had all the designs for the instrument from IBM. IBM had built one of the first ultra-high vacuum, low-temperature STMs in the country. And Mike had taken all the designs from there. And we reproduced much of Don Eigler's design in our lab. And I was responsible for designing a lot of things inside this ultra-high vacuum chamber, actually. and also a lot of low temperature paths. So we put it all together, and miraculously, it actually worked. And so after a few years of building this instrument, my project was to actually do the following. So to explain what my project was, I have to tell you what the Kondo effect is. So this, to do that, I have to go back to the early 1900s. So all of us are familiar with the temperature dependence of metals. We know that when you measure the resistance of a metal, a good metal like a copper or gold, as you lower temperature, what should happen is the resistance should really decrease continuously with temperature, because as you go to lower and lower temperatures, you have fewer and fewer phonons. And finally, it'll saturate at some low value. And the saturation happens because no matter how many phonons you're able to get rid of, you can never get rid of all the defects. There are still a few, ppm levels of some defects in your copper or gold, and that creates a small resistance to the flow of electric current. So this is what you expect for the behavior of resistivity. But what people found in the early 1900s is that in some materials, the resistance goes down and then at low temperatures starts going up again. And this was extremely mysterious. This means that you have this new scattering channel that becomes very strong at low temperatures. And the question is, what is going on? Where is this new scattering channel coming from? And why is the scattering channel temperature dependent? So Yun Kondo actually explained this beautifully. He did third order perturbation theory. And what he postulated was the following, that these materials where this happens, resistance goes down and comes back up. In these materials, you have a small number of magnetic impurities. So a magnetic impurity is a single atom impurity that has an unpaired electron. So it has a localized spin. So what happens is that the conduction electrons, these are the electrons that carry electric current, they interact with this localized impurity and they undergo something called spin flip scattering, where they come into the localized impurity and then they exchange spin as they scatter off. This spin flip scattering is what is responsible for this rise in temperature, rise in resistivity at low temperatures. But interestingly, what people realized is that you can actually solve this problem. So Kondo wrote down, I think, perturbation theory he did in the 1960s, but 20 or 30 years after that, people were able to find an exact solution to the Kondo problem. And when they did that, they found that at very low temperatures, this system does something really interesting. At low temperatures, all those conduction electrons that are surrounding this magnetic moment, they actually screen the magnetic moment completely, such that at long distances, you don't even notice that the magnetic moment exists. And that's why resistance, instead of continuously increasing, eventually actually saturates even in these materials. So one of the predictions of this theory for the Kondo impurity is that you should actually have something called a Kondo resonance. And this Kondo resonance is a sharp peak in the density of states at the Fermi energy. And this sharp peak is basically a dense set of low energy excitations of this body, right? Like you have this very nice sort of a quasi-particle that you've created right next to the localized magnetic moment. And it's the excitation of this sort of many body object that creates this Kondo resonance. So while the Kondo resonance had been predicted, it had not been measured. Okay, so Mike Cromie really wanted to see this Kondo resonance. So we put a bunch of cobalt atoms, these pointy things here, they are cobalt atoms, on the surface of gold. The surface here that you see is gold. And you also see the electrons, right? You see all these electron waves everywhere. So those are the electrons that live on the surface of of gold. And what we wanted to do is go park our tip on top of one of these cobalt atoms. And what we should, in theory, see is a sharp peak in the density of states. So instead, what we saw was this funny line shape, okay? And 0 here is the Fermi energy. So we saw something at the Fermi energy, but it didn't have the line shape that we expected. So from the time we took this data for about almost a whole year, I was running around with this data, talking to every theorist that I could talk to, trying to figure out what is this funny thing happening at the Fermi energy, because I was convinced. I thought, wait, there's a prediction, there should be a resonance at the Fermi energy. We're expecting to see a resonance. Instead, we see this funny thing. There's got to be some connection between this funny thing and the resonance that we're expecting. Finally, it was another experimentalist called Michael Bartonuni who told us what this could be. He said, why don't you look up old optical spectroscopy papers? There's something there called a Fano resonance, and this looks exactly like that. And so after a few months of, trying to figure out what was going on, we made the leap of faith, and we realized that, this funny thing here is exactly what we had been looking for. It is indeed the Kondo resonance. And there's actually a very interesting reason that it doesn't have the sharp, peaky line shape that we expect, and instead it looks like this. And that has to do with some detail of the tunneling process. Interestingly, the time that we were looking for the Kondo resonance, there was another group Mike had left, and another postdoc had succeeded him. And IBM was also looking for the Kondo resonance, and we beat them to it. And it was just luck. The system that they chose had a different signature, and it was really difficult in their system to figure out what was going on. And then we just got lucky, and we figured out what was going on before them. And this paper was published in Science. And it remains, I think, one of the works that I'm most proud of in my career, because this work set off a whole bunch of other works on both on single impurity Kondo effect and then something called a heavy fermion system. Okay, so we did a bunch of other things together, and then around 1999, I was ready to look for postdoc positions. Before I tell you what I did as a postdoc, let me tell you a couple of things that I learned, just working with Mike and working on these projects as a graduate student. The first thing I learned is this idea of a bold guess. And this is attributed to Sir Isaac Newton. No great discovery was ever made without a bold guess. And this is extremely important, because very often, it doesn't matter whether you're doing theory or experiment. You have an idea, you've got a result, you've got either a theoretical result or an experimental result, and there's a gap between the result and complete and the exciting physics that you're after, right? You're chasing after some exciting physics. You've got some result, and there's a gap. And what Sir Isaac Newton is saying is you have to have the courage to fill that gap yourself. You've got to be able to say, I've thought of everything possible. This is the only possible explanation. I'm just going to go with this interpretation. Okay. And I can't tell you the number of times people have made such bold leaps and they've proven to be correct. Okay, so that's the one thing. And we did this with the Kondo effect. We saw this resonance at the Fermi energy. We had no proof really, apart from that, there was a resonance at the Fermi energy. We had no other proof that this was the Kondo resonance. but that interpretation has actually borne the test of time. The other thing I learned in graduate school, which is that it's not just getting to the end that matters, right? It's not getting that beautiful result or publishing a really nice paper or whatever it is. It's not getting to the end. It's not just that matters. It's the process of getting there. So I enjoyed my work. I loved going to the lab. I loved building the instrument. I loved taking the data. And that was sort of a prize in itself. Even without the papers that we wrote, being in graduate school was a huge amount of fun. And that's the second thing that I've learned. It's just that the process is as important as the end result. Okay. All right. So like I said, in 1999, I was ready to transition to a postdoc. I had the Condor paper and a couple of other papers, so I was sort of, well poised to get a postdoc job. And I did actually get many offers. And I had to choose. And it's hard to choose, right? But I actually decided to work with Seamus Davis, who's at Berkeley. And one of the biggest reasons is, in my last year of graduate school, his current postdoc came to give a talk and showed these absolutely gorgeous images of vortices in a superconductor. I had never seen such images before. And so I really wanted to work with Seamus on superconductivity. And moreover, as I was interviewing for postdoc positions everywhere, I had gone to MIT to talk to Mark Kastner, and he had told me about superconductivity. At that time, high temperature superconductivity was very hot. It was the thing to work on. And so I really, that's the reason I wanted to go to Seamus's lab. I wanted to work on high temperature superconductivity with STM. So I went to Berkeley. Berkeley campus is beautiful. I just wanted to show you this picture. If you haven't been to Berkeley, if you have a chance to go there, you should go there. It's one of my favorite campuses. Sorry, this is so blurred. I tried to look for a better image, but this is Seamus. Seamus standing in front of this really nice STM that he and Shu-Hang Pan and Eric Hudson had built. They had just gotten it working, and they were just beginning to get data on high temperature superconductors. I worked on this high temperature superconductor called BISCO, bismuth, strontium, calcium, copper oxide. This is an image, a topography of this material. And on the right, you see an image actually of what superconductivity looks like. This is how the gap in this material varies as a function of position. And what you notice is that it's extremely inhomogeneous. And so this was the first time that this had been measured, the stark inhomogeneity of the electronic properties of the superconductor. In addition to working on high temperature superconductors, I was also pregnant with twins. So you can see here, I'm sitting here working on something, and you can see that I'm pretty seriously pregnant at this time. So as a postdoc, working in this high pressure lab, juggling the lab and two babies, and that whole thing was extremely interesting, I have to say. But even if you don't have twins, right, the postdoc experience is pretty challenging. And for those who are graduate students now who want to do a postdoc, I just wanted to sort of give you a heads up on what the challenges are. So when you face these challenges, you're not surprised. You realize that it's sort of universal, right? The first thing is, as a postdoc, you have to realize when you come in as a graduate student, you come in as a cohort. So you have your other graduate students, and they're your instant friends, okay? But when you go to do a postdoc, you go alone. So there's no built-in community, and that can be very, very isolating. The second thing is when you're a student, graduate student, you're still a student. But as a postdoc, you're now working and you're suddenly an adult with responsibilities. And sometimes people have, they get married, they have children, all kinds of things are happening to them. And so that can be a pretty big challenge to juggle. When you're in grad school, you enter a group. As a young student, you don't know anything. And then as you're leaving, you're a senior graduate student and you're the expert in whatever you've been working on. And when you go to do a postdoc, suddenly nobody knows how good you are. And you have to prove yourself all over again. And this can, even if you didn't have the imposter syndrome before, this kind of thing where you have to prove yourself can give you a strong feeling of imposter syndrome where you start doubting, you start thinking, oh my God, I don't know how much I know. And if other people find out how little I know, it's going to be bad. So that's another challenge. And finally, you suddenly realize you don't have infinite time because, when you're a graduate student, it feels like you have a huge amount of time. But as a postdoc, you have a few years to do your projects, get your data, write your papers, and apply for jobs. So these are pretty big challenges, right? But, we all get through them. And so here's my small bit of advice to deal with your postdoc years. The first thing is I would strongly suggest that you pick your postdoc position with intention. You should know what you're looking for. You should look at the productivity of the group. If you're interested in getting papers out, right, during your graduate career, you had few papers and you really need many more papers to get a faculty position. If you're interested in that, you should look at the productivity of the group. If you had a lot of papers already, you should look at some acquiring complementary skills. But whatever it is, whatever postdoc position you take, it should be done with intention. The second thing is don't work in isolation. You don't have to be isolated. Even though you don't come in with a cohort, you can make your own cohort. You can talk to your colleagues. You can talk to other professors in the department. You should talk to your postdoc advisor frequently. You should build your... Okay. And then I think you should, while you're doing your postdoc, every few months or so, you should take stock of your projects. You should think, is this going in a good direction? Can I see a dead end coming? If you're seeing a dead end, you shouldn't be afraid to change the path that you're on. Just because there's a fallacy actually. People think, oh my God, I've invested all this time and energy into this project. I just have to keep going. But that's actually the wrong way of thinking. It doesn't matter how much time and energy you've invested in something. If you can see it's not going to lead to something, you have to be willing to drop it. Okay, so that's just like my 2 bits of advice for a successful postdoc. But at the end of the postdoc, of course, assuming you're going to grow, you want to go into academia, you have to apply for jobs. And what's the most important thing there? Well, so according to me, here's what it is. One of the most important aspects of applying for jobs in academia is your research plan. You have to craft it with thought, do a lot of research into what the most cutting edge questions are in physics or whatever field you're in, electrical engineering, mechanical. What is the cutting edge stuff that people are working on? Think about that, okay? Craft your research plan with a huge amount of thought. Get feedback on your research. Don't just do it yourself. Show it to your advisor, show it to your other colleagues, get feedback. It's really important. Prepare your talk. So assuming you're going to get interviewed, you'll have to give a research talk. Prepare the talk. Take a lot of time, spend time and energy preparing it. Practice your talk. Make use of your friends and colleagues again and practice in front of them, okay? I can't tell you now being on the other side, hiring people, I can't tell you how many times it happens that we interview someone and we realize that they're just completely unprepared. And it's such a sad thing because the fact that you've made it to the interview means that we are interested in you. The fact that you didn't get the job means sometimes it could mean that you didn't do a good job, right, in your interview. But having said that, the last thing I do want to say is that getting a job, there are two aspects to it. One is it's your record and how your interviews goes, but it's also another aspect is your fit to the department. So when you start interviewing and you know, it's very disheartening when you don't get job offers. But remember that it's not just a function of how good you are. It's also a function of what the department wants. And sometimes there's a mismatch. So keep that in the back of your mind and don't get disheartened. Okay, so I did get a job and I went to Boston College in 2002. And there I had to build a lab again. And I used my experience from my postdoc, where I saw the lab that Seamus had built, and my experience as a graduate student, where, you know, my way we had built this lab together. And I used that and decided that I wanted to have multiple systems. I would buy a scanning tunneling microscope. By then, these things were actually commercially available. You didn't have to build your own. And I would also build one. That was my goal. And while doing that, of course, I was also raising a family. Remember, I had those twins. They were still around. We had to bring them up. And that was also a lot of fun. So let's ask this following question. How do you choose what to work on? Okay. Because now there's no one telling you what to do. You know, your graduate advisor, my graduate advisor was interested in the Kondo effect. That's why I worked on the Kondo effect. As a postdoc, I was in Seamus's lab. I wanted to learn about superconductivity. That's what he was working on. But now I get to choose what I want to work on. And what I did at first was I still continued to work on what I did as a postdoc. And I was working on these high temperature superconductors. And we published a few papers, but I quickly realized that field by then had already gotten entrenched. There were a huge number of people working on that in that area, and making a mark in it was impossible. Getting recognized for your work was impossible. And so I, you know, after publishing those few papers and getting no feedback from the community, I realized that this was not going to help me in my career. And although I was really interested because there are really cool fundamental questions in the cuprates that I wanted to address, I decided that I would work on something else. And I was continuously looking for things to work on. And in 2006, the field of topological insulators exploded. And when that happened, I jumped into it. So that's what I was working on when I was at Boston College. And the one thing here is I want to stress, you know, you can always change your mind. Remember that. Okay. So just in general, I have a couple of guiding principles that I've used to determine what to work on. One is I always ask the question, is there a big problem I can address? Okay, so because I'm an experimentalist, I can choose to work on many, many different kinds of materials. But how do I choose which one to work on? I use this question. Is there a problem I can address? And is it an important problem? At least, you know, it's difficult to define that, but let's say I'm able to do that. So that's the first guiding principle that I use. The second one is I always want to make room for serendipity, because if you only choose materials and problems to work on that you know are going to give you big results, you know, millions of other people are also working on those things. And they are typically difficult problems to work on. There is no guarantee of success. However, if you allow room for unknown systems, right, go down a less trodden path, you might find something which is surprising, and that's serendipity. So these are the two things. There's a balance between these two, between going down the path of serendipity and going down the path of defining what problems you want to work on. And I've always had a balance of both kinds of things going on in my lab. So what did I learn in the years that I was at Boston College? I was at Boston College as an assistant professor and then as an associate professor, and I actually got promoted to full professor, but I never actually finished. I never started my position as a full professor. I left towards the end. So what did I learn at BC? One of the biggest lessons I learned was the value of collaborations. So, collaborators, when you're a young assistant professors, are like godsend because they can act as mentors, right? But then as you get more sophisticated, they still provide huge value. You can get new ideas for problems to work on. They often provide complementary expertise. A lot of my collaborators are theorists because I'm an experimentalist. A lot of my collaborators are theorists. I have theory collaborators that I work with very closely. From their perspective, they also get something of working with an experimentalist like me. Collaborators can provide all kinds of support. They can provide intellectual support, material support, moral support. Okay, so collaborators are extremely important. And so this is the thing that I learned at Boston College. I left with a network of extremely strong collaborators. Okay, so I stayed at BC until 2014. And why did I leave? Things were going really well. I loved my colleagues. I loved the university. Boston College is a great place to work. My colleagues were fantastic, not just as collaborators. We had a great, tight team of people. We had a crystal growth person, a neutron scattering, who was also a neutron scattering person. I was doing STM, and we had a couple of theorists, and we were all working together as a really fantastic, well-knit team. But Boston College physics department is also very small. And the number of graduate students we get every year is a very small number. And I really wanted to expand. And so I really was thinking, what should I do? How do I expand? The path to expanding and getting bigger was not very clear to me at BC. And so in 2014, I got the offer from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to move there as a full professor. And I have to say, reluctantly, it was hard to leave Boston College. I still wanted to, go to UIUC. UIUC is one of the top condensed matter programs in the US. In fact, until recently, it was ranked number one, and it had been ranked number one in condensed matter for decades. So I was very excited to go there and to expand my programs, meet new colleagues, get new ideas, etc. So of course, I had to start from scratch. We built a new lab. This is like our, AutoCAD drawing of the new lab, STM1, STM2, STM3. This is what the room looked like when I started. We have to, I mentioned pits. The STMs that I use require tall ceilings, and we usually have to dig a 6 feet or deeper pit in the ground. The Midwest is basically floating on water. You dig 1 foot underground and water comes out. To dig 6 feet, they had to basically continuously pump the water out as they were digging. And it took almost a year for these pits to be built, the cement to be poured, the cement to dry enough that we could occupy the lab. And so we moved into the lab in 2016, February. And here at University of Illinois, I've set up all of these different instruments. I think the one that we've been working on most recently that I like the most, like to think about the most, is this laser STM, where we've coupled laser light into the STM tip sample junction. And with this new technique, we hope to get dynamics, something that's very difficult to do with scanning tunneling microscopy. We also have 2 molecular beam epitaxy systems. And with this, we're able to grow our own thin films. And this is just an example of all the different thin films that we've grown in my lab. So many of these are single layers, and they have a huge number of interesting properties. This one is a superconductor. This one is this is a superconductor. But the same niobium selenide in a different form is actually a Mott insulator. This is a high temperature superconductor. This is a topological insulator. This is a quantum spill Hall system, and so on. So we've grown all these materials and studied them with STM. And now in my lab, we work on many different things. We work on topology, superconductivity, magnetism, and strong correlations. Okay, so then in the remainder of the time that I have, maybe 10 minutes, take 10 more minutes, maybe less, I want to talk about what all, being a physicist for many, many years. I've worked in academia for many, many years. I want to sort of give you a glimpse of, what I've learned over these years. Some of this is particular to academia, but much of this advice, I was just trying to avoid using the word advice, but much of this advice is general and it's relevant for any job that you do. Okay, so let's ask the question: is everything perfect? And I really enjoy my job. I get to interact with young people like you. It's a creative job. I told you about this new instrument that we've built. We design and build new instruments. It's challenging. It's fun. There's no dearth of fun. When we have new data, new results, I feel like a detective trying to figure out what's going on. And more importantly, I feel like I'm contributing to society because we teach. So when I teach a course, I feel like I'm educating young minds and I feel like I'm contributing to society. So it's almost like, a job which has everything rolled into one. Managing a lab is like being an entrepreneur. You have to raise money. You have to make sure everybody, gets their salary. So you get aspects of all kinds of other jobs all rolled into this job. So then what are the challenges? The first is work-life balance, which would be true for anybody in any job, but it's particularly true for academic jobs, which are seen as very demanding. But I'm here to tell you that it does exist in academia. In fact, my colleagues do many, many things quite seriously. Some of them do something called swing dancing. It's a particular dancing that's sort of very, very popular in the Midwest. One of my colleagues sings in the opera almost professionally. He does shows. He practices every day. One of my other colleagues does taekwondo. He's 88 years old. My colleagues produce plays, have a social life, bring up children. So all of this is possible, okay? And how do you do this? So here's my 2 cents of how to achieve this long-sought work-life balance. The first thing I'd like to say is somebody else's solution will not be your solution. You have to find your own path, okay? Whatever that is, that depends upon your own circumstances, what you'd like to do with your time, but you have to find your own path. My solution was to get as much help as I could. I thought my solution was, I thought my time is important. and I can outsource other things, cooking, cleaning, childcare. I can outsource this. And I live in the US and it's expensive, but it was valuable to me to have whatever I did to get extra time that I could actually spend on, spending time with my children or with my family or my husband. If I could outsource these things, I had time to do these other things. So I was willing to do that. That was my trade-off. Don't be afraid to say no, right? You'll be asked to do many, many things, especially as you get more and more senior. There'll be outside forces asking you to review projects, review proposals, write letters, do all kinds of things. And you have to know when to say no. And you have to be able to prioritize. Not everything is equally important. And I'll come back to this idea of prioritizing things again in a bit. The other problem, of course, is stress. Even in a job, you could feel isolated, excluded. There could be bias. People might be seeing you in a stereotypical way. You might have family issues. Aging parents is one example. Financial issues. So how do you deal with all this? And here's my 2 cents, right? This goes beyond just being in academia. One is you should build a network of people. And this network, it should be both a professional network and a personal network. This structure that you build around you can buffer you from stress, okay? The other thing is, this is particularly true for academia. Don't take rejections personally. We all write papers that don't get into the journals we'd like to get them into. We all write proposals that don't get funded. We all get rejections left, right, and center, but you shouldn't take these rejections personally, but rather you should learn from them, right? If you write a proposal, you get a report, you look at the report and you say, okay, yeah, some of this makes sense. Some of it doesn't make sense. Toss the stuff that doesn't make sense out and learn from the stuff that makes sense. Set long-term goals. These long-term goals can help you weather the short-term stresses. So you'll have all these short-term stresses. You'll be going up and down, but think about your long-term goal, and you just basically steadily work towards your long-term goal. This is really important to me, setting time aside for physical activity. We don't realize how important this is, but it doesn't matter what the physical activity is. It could be you play a sport, you go do cycling, you swim, you run, you play basketball, you walk. It doesn't matter what it is, right? In fact, when I was a graduate student, I was doing a lot of things. I learned how to rollerblade. I used to go rollerblading around the Charles River. I used to go swimming. And it was then I realized that physical activity is really important. And for me, it's actually been extremely an important part of my life. And that helps in reducing stress. And then set time aside for social activity. That's another thing, right? If you have to be able to spend time with your friends and your family, and that's extremely important. And the last thing I would say is don't be a perfectionist. There's a fine line between wanting to do things well, writing a nice paper, finishing the research project, until the very end. Okay, you do a good job, but doing a good job is not the same as being a perfectionist. Doing a good job is about you. Being a perfectionist is about how you're seen. If you find yourself thinking that you're a perfectionist, you have to learn to step back, okay? And there are ways to deal with these things, but I would strongly suggest if you find yourself being a perfectionist, it can create a lot of unnecessary stress in your life. So don't be a perfectionist. Okay, so finally, I have some general advice, and I'll just go through it one by one. This is my second last slide. The first general advice, which I think is really important, this is stuff that, almost that I wish somebody had told me when I was really young. Everybody has their own little flaws, right? Whatever they are. But some of these problems are big enough that they can actually hurt your career, prevent you from doing what you want to do. It's best to identify these big, issues early. As soon as you see a problem that's actually preventing you from achieving what you want, once you see it, you recognize what the problem is, and you should deal with it. Let me give you an example. Let's say that it's difficult for you to write. A lot of people have trouble writing. You have a problem. You can actually deal with it. You can get better at writing. You can learn how to write well. Nobody is born into this world knowing how to write well. You can actually learn how to write well. And there are many ways to do this, and I don't have time to get into that. But that's just an example of something you can learn. Or another example is perfectionism. If you find yourself being a perfectionist, you can learn how to step back from it. So identify roadblocks and deal with them. The second thing is, this is for people who are going to be in academia, but remember why you wanted to be a scientist in the first place. You started with passion, right? I didn't know I wanted to be a physicist, but my passion for physics came from reading Scientific American and reading about grand unification and reading about, little particles like quarks and gluons and this and that. And that's where my passion for science came from. And what happens is, as time goes on and you get into the nitty-gritty of whatever work you're doing, you forget this passion. But this passion is really important. If you have to put it on the wall, do something. Remind yourself it's important, because the passion will actually guide you and show you the path to figuring out which problems you should be working on. These are the most fun problems that you'll ever work on. And it's most likely, if you work on problems like that, you're most likely to get big results. Don't say you don't have time. If you don't have time today, you're not going to have time tomorrow, because trust me, you're going to get busier and busier and busier. So don't use lack of time as an excuse. If you want to do something, you can find time for it. There are ways to manage time. So don't use lack of time as an excuse. Take help from your friends and your colleagues. This comes back to the network of people that I was telling you to build earlier. Don't think you have to do everything on your own. When I wrote my first few papers, maybe my first 5 or 6 papers, every single paper I would hand to one of my colleagues and say, please read this, I need some feedback. My colleagues were fantastic. I would have entire paragraphs shifted around, word by word changes. They were amazing. But this is what your colleagues do for you, and then you in turn do this for other people, right? My proposals, I handed it to everyone I could think of, got feedback, incorporated it. Just don't do things alone. Take help. And this is true of any job, by the way, even if you start a job in a company. When you first start, you don't know much. Learn from other people. Ask questions. Prioritize. Everything is not equally important. Just as an example, let's say you've been very successful raising money. You've got $1 million, but you have no papers. It's clear where your priorities should lie. You're not supposed to now go chasing after the next $1 million. You should be writing papers. This is just a trivial example, but prioritize. And it's not that difficult. If you can actually, there are strategies to prioritize. So prioritize, make sure you know what is important and what is not important. Prioritize your mental and physical health, okay? It's actually really important. This goes back to this physical activity and social life that I was talking about. You don't know how important it is, but it's extremely important. Don't be afraid to work hard. Sometimes we think, oh my God, if I work, I know I have all this work I have to get done, but if I spend so much time working, then how am I going to have work-life balance? It doesn't work that way. You do what you have to do, you meet that deadline, and then you go back and you spend time with your family. You make the choices that you need. Don't be afraid to work hard. It can be done. You can have the work-life balance. You can and work hard. So don't be afraid. Without hard work, none of this stuff is possible, right? So that's really important. Finally, be a good citizen. Be generous. Everybody's time is precious, but being a good citizen means that you do things that are just not just for yourself, but also for the community around you. And remember why this is important. If everybody behaved in this way as a good citizen, then as a group, you'll be a healthier and happier group, right? But if everybody behaves in an individualistic way, then as a group, it'll be a much sadder and a much, much less fun place to work in. Things need to get done. Be a good citizen. Okay. So finally, I just want to leave you with one last thing. This is Tony Leggett. He is a Nobel laureate. He, until a couple of years ago, was a faculty member at the University of Illinois in my department. He's an amazing person. And very recently, like as of 3 days ago, the College of Engineering, physics is a part of College of Engineering here, decided to name we have a theory institute. It's called Institute for Condensed Matter Theory. They decided to name the institute after Tony Leggett. So it's now going to be called Anthony J. Leggett Institute for Condensed Matter Theory. So there was an inauguration and opening ceremony, and everybody gave speeches, and Tony also gave a speech. And he said a few important things, but one of the things that he said, which I really thought I should convey to you all today, is the following. He said, any work you do thoroughly is never wasted. And what he meant by this is the following. It doesn't matter what the work is, right? It doesn't matter if it's a problem that's already been solved, if it's a small thing that you did, or if it's a big thing that you did. It's a little piece of code that you wrote. Whatever it is, anything that you do and you do it well is never wasted. And this is really, really important. So with that, I think I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. And do we have any questions? Oh, yes.
Thank you, Prof Madhavan, for the very interesting talk. We are open to with the Q&A is open now. Please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box so that we can have the discussion. Okay, we have multiple questions already. Ma'am, thank you for the great talk. So the first question from Vasantan is, can the professor give some advice on working with semiconductor industry collaborators, and what advice would you give to someone who wants to get grants or scholarships for research collaborations with USA and especially academia or industry?
Okay. Is Vasantan a graduate student, a postdoc? Who is this? Can you tell me what stage of career you're?
I'm not sure, ma'am. I think because we just see the name.
Maybe he can type it in.
Yeah.
I'll wait to get that answer before I give any advice, because I'd like to know what stage of career you're in. Why don't I go to the next one while I get the answer to that? Okay.
So the next question is, what if the people around you expect you to be a perfectionist and keep bugging you about being not a perfectionist. So what should be done in that case?
Yeah. So I think, this is where I was talking about there being a fine line between doing something well and being a perfectionist. Doing something well is when you get to that 97% point. You say, okay, it's done. I'm done, right? That last 3% is just it's going to require, let's say you've already spent 20 hours working on something. The last 3% might require another 20 hours. And at that point, there's something called a law of diminishing returns. You're at that point already. So I don't know, whether people around you are telling you to be a perfectionist or if they're telling you to do something well, because there's a difference. Doing something well requires you to spend time, energy, effort. You have to be self-critical if you want to do something well. You have to be able to see what you've done. It doesn't matter what it is, writing a code, writing a paper, doing an experiment. You have to look at it and you have to say, okay, this is what I've done. What do I need to improve? What can I do better? You have to be self-critical. And as you become self-critical, being self-critical is not about criticizing ourselves. It's about figuring out, what the problems are with what you've done and fixing those problems. So if you're self-critical and you're able to sort of analyze what you've done and fix everything that you can, I can't imagine then at that point that somebody is going to ask you for more than that. That's the best anybody can do, okay? If you're able to do that, if you're able to be self-critical and fix everything that you're able to fix, then nobody can ask for more than that. So I don't know what else to say. Okay, did Vasantan respond about?
Yes, Prof. So he's a senior research fellow in the physics department.
Okay. So in terms of working with semiconductor industry collaborators, so I think I don't understand this question exactly. I don't know if Vasantan, I don't know if you want, if you already have collaborators or if you're looking for collaborators. I'm not sure exactly what you want. I think in Singapore, there are many, many, many opportunities. I know a lot of people work with industry collaborators, so I'm not exactly sure what the question is. The third question about advice to get grant scholarships for research collaboration with US. The US does have avenues for international collaborations. National Science Foundation has international grants. These are very specific grants that are meant for collaborations with international institutes. Also, foundations have avenues for collaboration. There are many sort of avenues within the US for international collaborations. Maybe you just write to me and I can point you in that direction.
Sure, Prof. Thank you for the answer. I think Prof. Tam Nguyen wants to talk with you.
Sure.
So
Shall I stop sharing? Maybe
it's fine.
Okay.
So I will allow him to talk. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Vidya. This is actually me, Ben.
Hi.
Somehow I'm logged in through the account of my wife. Funny enough. So thanks once again for agreeing to this, and I think this has been immensely helpful to the students. As a matter of fact, I took a couple of really useful points away from it. I was sort of interested in the family aspect of it. I'm a young dad with a 2-year-old, and I find it difficult sometimes to juggle.
Yeah.
being mom of twins during your postdoc and then eventual, assistant professorship, that sounds immensely hard. Like, was there ever any point in your career where you asked yourself whether you need to choose between family and career?
So here's what I did, and I don't know if this will work for everybody. The short answer is no, and I'll tell you what I did that avoided a lot of guilt on my part, which is when I came home, I would just be completely present. So once I came home, I wouldn't work when they were little. So they had my full attention. That's what I'm trying to say. And so even though I would spend the whole day away from my children and away from my family, once I came home, I was with them. So that was a big deal for me. So that helped because I could pay attention to them and they knew they had my attention, and that was a big deal. The second thing is I also threw money at the problem. We're all, nobody's paid a lot of money, right? We're all paid whatever we're paid. But I just didn't mind being broke. I wanted to make sure that the kids had good childcare, and I was comfortable leaving them with whoever it was, which meant that for many years we had a nanny who would come to the house and take care of the kids, and it gave me peace of mind. And so so the first couple of years, my parents were there, and that was easy. But once we moved to Boston, we had to manage the kids, and this is how I did it. I threw money at the problem, got broke. It was okay with me. Only because, again, it was this thing about long-term and short-term thing. I had the long-term thing in mind. I knew that whatever this financial situation I was in currently, it was a temporary thing, and eventually it would get sorted out. So I was willing to do that. We had a cleaner, somebody who would come and clean the house. We had help. I got as much help as possible. So that's how I managed.
That makes a lot of.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Something's happened to the...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I got kicked out for a moment.
Yeah. So really, I think it's just...
No, that's extremely useful. I think, especially...
I mean, yeah, I think it's just hard these days to be that cut off, because now you go home and you're still on your computer and you're still wanting to get some work done. And so that's very tricky. But when my kids were little, I could just, we had computers. I'm not saying we didn't have computers, but I could just say, no, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to be with my kids.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great because I
Hey,
think...
I see you now.
Yeah, finally the camera is working. No,
Yes.
but I think that's going to give a lot of courage to especially the female students, right? Who may ask themselves, if they have to make those choices, right? So you're one of the great examples of, yes, it's possible. You can have kids.
It is possible without too much guilt.
Right. No, perfect.
Another of my colleagues here, she's a professor, I won't say where because then you might be able to find her, but she was traveling a lot. Her child was 2, and then she decided I can't do it. So she just basically cut off traveling for a year. And she's an assistant professor, but she made that decision. So people do these things.
Right. Yeah. No, it does make sense.
Yeah. It's heart-wrenching to leave your child behind.
That's true.
Also, I would bring bribes everywhere I went.
What kind of bribes? Can you give me a tip?
Dolls and toys and every possible thing I could think of.
Okay, thanks, Vidya.
Sure.
Ma'am, so the next question is from Malik, who wants to thanks you for the talk and is curious about how to transition to different fields after PhD. without any experience or output to support the curiosity?
So let's see. I see. You have to get lucky. Someone has to give you a break. It's not that easy after a PhD. You're saying, let's say you have no experience. Let's say you wanted to go into the finance industry and you had no experience whatsoever. And usually theorists are able to get a job in the finance industry, but for an experimentalist, unless they've been working on coding or something, it's much more difficult. That is tricky. You might have to sort of, if you want to do something different after a PhD, you may have to do a stepping stone job. One idea of a stepping stone job is consulting. So there are these companies, they're called engineering consulting companies, and they do many, many different projects. So an engineering consulting company, if you have a product and you have a problem you need to solve, you would come to an engineering consulting company and say, hey, I have this little problem. Can you build this little thing for me? And then that engineering consulting company would build that little thing for you, would prototype it. And these engineering consulting companies have a very broad range of projects that they work on. So that's like a stepping stone company to get into what you want to do. You can with whatever PhD you have, your PhD will certainly be valuable to one of these companies. You do a stepping stone job and then you find another job. That's one example. That's one thing I can think of doing. Yeah. Or you network. If you have a network, you tap your network, let's say whoever. So here at University of Illinois, the person who runs the graduate program, Lance Cooper, he keeps a list of where our graduate students have gone. And this base of knowledge is our network. So when a graduate student here wants to transition, they can go and look up a former graduate student and who's in a particular company and call them up and say, hey, I'm from University of Illinois. And usually they will answer your call or they will answer your email. So you can tap your network. That's another way of sort of doing something that you're not completely trained for. Someone has to give you a chance.
Thank you, ma'am, for the answer. The next question is from Pratul, who wants to know, when having multiple prospective career paths, which are all equally promising, how do one choose what to do, which one to select among them?
Yeah, that's where your passion comes in. Okay. I mean, first, for every career path that you have, every prospect that you have, you should talk to the people who are actually working there, right? The people who are let's say it's a company, people who are working in that company, you should actually talk to those people. So you know what reality is, because when you go and you visit, you're shown the shiniest part of the company, the shiniest part of the job. You should know what reality is. But the second thing is, it's a matter of your priorities. Every job has pros and cons, right? Some jobs, the first 5 years, I'm going to be working like mad. But if I work like mad, then I'm going to have a fantastic, I'm going to be paid like, $500,000 a year, and I'm going to have whatever, I'm going to, end up in this fantastic situation. There are jobs like that. There are other jobs where it's, that's not the career path, but it's going to be extremely satisfying. You're going to work on important problems, the interesting problems, right? That's where your passion comes in. That's one thing. So use your passion. The other thing I would say is use your family circumstances. Everybody has goals in their life. Everybody wants to do, you have your own goals. You know what you probably, I don't know, you should think about where you want to be in 5 years. Where would you like to be in 7 years? And you can use that to guide what kind of a job you take up.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. The next question from Luan Le is may I know how do you catch up with the physics knowledge during the first few years of PhD when you are working on something new? And how do you ask for help when you have questions?
Questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are good questions. All of these have been great questions. So for physics, I think there are many things you can do. One is you attend seminars and colloquia. And at first, it's hard to understand what's going on. But as time goes on, you'll understand more and more. The second thing is I took a lot of courses when I was in graduate school. That did help. If you think there are areas where you have particular holes, right? Like you know which areas you have holes, you can try to sort of compensate in those areas. Take specific courses that will fill the gaps in your knowledge. The third thing is, for me, there are two things that have been really important. The first is you don't realize how much capacity you have to learn a subject deeply until you start teaching. When you start teaching is when you realize, oh my God, I can actually learn this thing on my own. When I started teaching, I realized, oh my God, I can open up a textbook and start following the textbook from the beginning to the end. And if I follow it line by line, I can learn this stuff. And if I had known that when I was a graduate student, I would have opened textbooks and read them line by line. I just didn't realize. So when you start teaching is when you really learn how to learn new things, right? By methodically following what's in the book. You can do it. You can learn new things. The second thing is people. So now when I have a question, I go to my theory colleagues and I say, hey, I don't understand this. Explain it to me. And then they tell me what it is. And I go back and I forget what they've said. And then I go back to them. And then I say, hey, I know you told me this already. Tell me again. And they do. And so that's the help that I was talking about. You can get help. You can ask your theory colleagues or your theory friends who may know a particular subject better than you do. In terms of how do you ask for help when you have questions, it depends on what the question is. If it's a question about your research project, you should ask your advisor. If your advisor cannot help you, you should ask your advisor to point you to someone who can help you. If your advisor cannot point you to someone who can help you, then you'll have to read papers, or talk to people. The students who are working in the same department as you, they are your resource. The postdocs who are working in the department, they are your resource. So you can tap into those resources. Ask your fellow students and postdocs. They may be able to help. So that's what I would do.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So this is one more. How did your background in engineering help you work in experimental physics? Did this different perspective help you a lot in your graduate research?
Actually, it did, surprisingly. So when I did engineering, we had many hours of learning how to machine, learning how to do carpentry, learning how to do welding. We had so many hours, even foundry. So I had all this hands-on experience, which was extremely useful when I became an experimentalist. So I also learned how to design, like AutoCAD design, and that was also extremely useful because now whenever I have to make a new instrument, I design it on my own. So that was really useful. So there were many aspects of my engineering, but the thing that it didn't teach me was quantum mechanics. So that I had to learn on my own.
No. Ma'am, the next question is about faculty hiring. So it is about how important is it to have a nature or science or high quality publication to get faculty positions? And are there in the hiring, are there any other objective goal the hiring committee seeks during faculty recruitments? And do US universities prefer to hire US university graduates for academic positions?
These are really important questions.
Mhm.
And I think the question, let me start with the first one about nature and science publications. I think that really depends on your particular area. In condensed matter theory, they don't care about nature or science. Did you do? The quality of your work. And they can usually see the quality of your work from many things. One of them is the papers that you've written, who's been on those papers, how much of the work that you've done can be attributed to you versus your advisor, the scope of the work that you've done, what expertise do you have? They can see all that. So all that is really important. So it depends on the exact field where you're applying. In condensed matter experiment, typically, people who get faculty positions tend to have at least some evidence that they've done some really groundbreaking work as either as a graduate student or as a postdoc. And very often that's conflated with a science or nature publication, but it doesn't have to be the case. You could have a PRL, for example, that's amazing, that everybody recognizes is amazing. But people are looking for evidence that you can do really cutting edge science. It's slightly more difficult as an experimentalist to prove that. And that's why people look for science and nature publications. So it really depends on which subfield you're applying to.
Okay.
If you're an astronomer, nobody's going to ask for science and nature publications. If you're, it's really field specific. And then what were the other two questions? They've disappeared.
It's about I think are there any
I see it.
are there any other objective goal the hiring committee seeks?
There are other goals. We have diversity goals. We would like to improve the diversity of our faculty. That's a constant goal. And the other things are complementarity. So, we have faculty doing certain things, but we'd like to hire someone who's doing something that's complementary to what we're doing. Not exactly the same thing, but complementary. And that's really important. So there are many such goals, right? And then what else do we have? We have sometimes a certain subgroup is missing a particular kind of person who does a particular kind of thing, right? Like right now we're missing a quantum theorist, a theorist who works on quantum information problems. So sometimes, we look for particular people like that. Yeah. So it's not just your publication record, but this fitting into a certain department. That's why I was talking about this even earlier. Departments are looking for people who are complementary to the existing faculty. So that's another thing. And then the other question about US, no, there's no preference given to anything like that. It's your record your record, your recommendation letters, those are important.
So the next question is from Xiang Zhang, who wants to know how to balance the publication and its practical applications, and how does one concur with the fact that some of the research does not have practical applications?
So this is the thing. This is again, comes back to your passion. There is something called curiosity-driven science. Okay. And this can occur only in societies that have money above and beyond taking care of basic needs, foods, shelter, clothing, health. So if in societies that value basic science and curiosity-driven research have some money to, it's like supporting artists almost, right? You should feel, I mean, scientists feel grateful because my work doesn't have to be supported. There's no clear use for it. Maybe in 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, who knows? Some of what I do might be useful, but everything I do is for the advancement of knowledge. And it's not necessarily going to be useful. But that's what I'm interested in. That's my passion. But if you're interested in, and for example, there are many people I know who are not interested in that. Instead, they're interested in benefiting humanity directly. They're interested in doing useful things, right? I'm not suggesting that my work doesn't benefit humanity, but it's a very indirect thing. Whereas other people are interested in doing direct things like developing a better robot to do certain things, or developing a better wheelchair, something like that, or whatever field you're in. So I think you have to decide for yourself what you're interested in, right? So it's not about balancing publications and practicalities. It's really not about that. You should be in a field that suits your passions, okay? If your passion is for doing practical things, then you should sort of slowly make your way to that. And if your passion is for doing fundamental stuff like I'm doing, then you should slowly make your way towards that.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from a postdoc who has a similar background to you. So they did their bachelor's in mechanical engineering and PhD in mathematics, but they feel that there is still quite a lot of gap in their knowledge of math. So building on your experiences, is there any way that what could be done to fill those gaps? For example, can courses be taken?
Yes, I think there are many things you can do. One is, of course, you can take courses. And even if you're not currently doing your PhD, there are online courses you can take. There are many, many, many online courses now. And also, you may not need a full course. You may need little courselets to fill your gaps. And I think those may be available online. But at the advanced level, I'm not sure. You can look for lectures. Just like I give talks about my work, mathematicians give lectures about their work. There are some lectures that are meant for, undergraduate or graduate students. You can look at those. But I think that if you have a PhD, then you can even learn on your own. That's the beauty of getting a PhD. It allows you to you don't realize it actually. Like I said, you don't realize until you start teaching. But if you feel you're missing knowledge in a certain area, you'd be so shocked. You can actually learn it. You can go and buy the right textbooks or look for lectures. People put their lecture notes online, right? If you're teaching a class, you put lecture notes online. Those are available, actually. You can look for it on Google. You look for these lecture notes, look for books, and you can teach yourself many, many things. And so that's, I think, maybe the best route.
Okay. And so those were all the questions we had in the Q&A section. So the students who are seeking seminar endorsement can scan the QR code that will be put up soon. But yeah, those were the questions, ma'am. Yeah, thank you for all the questions.
Oh, yeah, it's a... That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have background music. Bent by